So first of all, I'd like to thank and obviously welcome everyone who has been able to attend our consultation today. And so my name is Bassem, and I'm the European Regional Chair on behalf of the International Association for Political Science Students. And as part of our partnership with the UN 75, we've been able to organize this consultation on the topic of multilateralism and its implications on the world stage. I now would like to welcome all of our speakers who have been extremely helpful and gracious to offer their time and expertise to help educate and expand our knowledge on the topic. So today, as part of our panel, we have Daniel Perel from the Baha'i International Community and the UN Office, Wanto from the UN Department of Global Communications, Rustam Baratov, who is a Belgian youth leader, and we have also Mr. Anthony Dworkin, who is a senior policy fellow at the European Council and Foreign Relations. We will also have other members who will do presentations, such as Dr. Yoni, and we'll have Rory as well. And so stay tuned at the end for that. Today's schedule for everyone watching will be as follows. First, we'll start with a panel discussion where we'll have our speakers engage between themselves to address several key points surrounding multilateralism, its importance, and its general effect on world politics. Then we will be taking questions from all of you guys who are watching, and then we will address them and also make sure to stay tuned as we have a few presentations lined up still at the end. I would like to give the panelists and speakers an opportunity to speak, if they will, for a couple of minutes to basically introduce what they have to say on the topic. And we can start with you, Mr. Dworkin, if you'd like.
Yes. Hi. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this discussion. So I'm a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. It's a think tank that aims to look across Europe at foreign policy priorities. And I've been working quite a lot on multilateralism and what Europeans like to call the rules-based international order. So from a European perspective, this is a big priority of foreign policy. Europeans are most comfortable operating in a world that that works according to fixed rules, that's quite open in terms of trade, where disputes are settled, through the kind of application of international law and through diplomatic processes and negotiations, rather than through the use of force. And a lot of Europeans are very concerned at the moment that the world is kind of heading in the wrong direction from their perspective. That is, that we're moving towards a world which is more about, the kind of the spheres of influence where large countries kind of exert sway through through the kind of threat or use of force, or through their influence in certain parts of the world, and towards a more geopolitical world in that sense. And away from this kind of rules-based organized world. And if we look across the range of multilateral institutions, we can see, some of the problems that it's facing at the moment. We can look, maybe we'll start with the World Health Organization, because of course, that's something that's acquired a lot more importance in the last 6 months because of the coronavirus pandemic. And there is this perception that the World Health Organization is not working the way it should to kind of bring the world together. On the contrary, it seems to be being used as something of a political football between, on the one hand, the United States, and on the other hand, China. So the US is threatening to pull out of the World Health Organization, and there's the perception in the US and other places as well, that China has not really lived up to its responsibilities in the early stages of the pandemic to share information. And we could look at, several other organizations, I guess we will in the course of this discussion, and see the way that they also seem to be, instead of becoming a forum for international cooperation, they become more a kind of site of great power competition. And so I think that's the question that's really, the dominant question perhaps in international politics at the moment is whether this rules-based system, can be kind of renewed and refreshed in a way that enables international cooperation to become more effective, or whether it's inevitably we're drifting towards a world which is more competitive, where interconnections between countries are more a source of kind of rivalry and threat rather than a source of mutual advantage. And it's a big open question, which I guess we'll be getting into today. What's the way forward as far as refreshing multilateralism in a more competitive international environment?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Dworkin. Definitely, you've made great points that we will obviously get back to, especially in relation to China and the crisis of multilateralism between China and the US and Europe's place in that. I would like to give the floor to Rustam, if you'd like to say a few words about the topic as well.
Hi, it's nice to meet everyone. I hope everyone is hearing me clear and loud enough. Myself, a bit more background. So I'm from Belgium. I have some ties and my ethnicity goes back to Kazakhstan, but I've been mostly set forward to represent youth and some public policy in Europe and Asia on behalf of Belgium as well, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as one of the youth leaders. I've had some time to spend in the US, in New York, so I can maybe compare votes later on. But I think right now, and especially with the multilateralism, there is a need for multilateral cooperation. If you look at the current situation in Lesbos in Greece, where Belgium has sent like a team of 13 people, I know, and maybe Anthony Dworkin can complement that. In June, I think 17 or 18 June, there was a conclusion adopted by the Council to strengthen multilateralism. So there is a lot of discussion going. There's a lot of conversation going on today within the EU global strategy, and following those, Council's discussions and EU discussions is something that's coming more and more to the front of the UN, and I think that's something that we can link, as some of them, the UN Security Council members have been, more pushing for a multilateral cooperation. So I think we can highlight that, and yes, I'm happy to talk more about the position of Belgium in terms of the multilateral agreements as well, maybe like how to link that to the European cooperation as well, the UN and the US.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And definitely the point that you made about youth engagement and how we can strengthen multilateralism, not just in the EU, but in the world in general, is definitely a very important point that we will definitely address. I would like to now give the floor to Daniel Perel, if you'd like to say a few words about the topic.
Sure. I was just speaking with Rory, and she said there's no time limit, so it'll be about 3 hours for this introduction, and then we can get into some of the deeper issues after that. My name is Dan Perel. I serve as a representative for the Baha'i international community at the United Nations, a role that I've had the privilege to serve in for about 10 years now. And I think what I want to offer, just sort of as the perhaps some opening framing, is looking at the long arc of human history, because I think it's important to keep that in our minds as we are discussing, where humanity is and where it's going. I mean, we sort of started our organizational structures at the very local level for reasons related to technology and communication, and it was sort of community-based, and then it became nation-based, and of course city-states to nations. There was a brief period of empire, and now we have a couple of very strong regional examples, the EU of course being one of them, OAS, the AU. There are these examples of regional bodies that are perhaps gaining in some sort of strength, and then there are global bodies, the League of Nations being the first genuine attempt at global governance, and now the United Nations. And so, with each of these things, just like with any organic body, it grows, and then sort of new pressure is placed upon it, and it either has to die or adapt. And that's kind of the name of the game. And now we're seeing new pressures being placed on the current international order, where assumptions about state sovereignty that were really at the forefront in the 1940s may no longer have the same kind of resonance. We see that with COVID, with climate change, with all the national challenges we're facing, corporations and the internet, and all of these things are demonstrating that kind of the framework that we've been using for 75 years certainly is not meeting the needs of humanity today. So the question to me, when we're talking about multilateralism, is not so much how can we, either keep the system or maintain what we've got, but it's really how do we modify it in light of the reality of the world in which we live, so that it can be better suited to the needs that we're facing. And this is a very large question, but it's one that has to be answered either in the short term, medium term, or long term. I mean, it's an inevitability. And my goal, and I think the goal of our office and many with whom we work, is to make sure that the next iteration, whether it's adding to what we currently have or something completely new, the next iteration comes about not through great suffering and tragedy, but through a collective effort at seeing the needs of humanity and trying to meet them. The big barrier to this, of course, is that at the UN and in all of these places of global leadership, it's mainly made up of the victors of this system. And so you're turning to the victors of this system and saying, hey, could you please change it so that it's more fair, so that we can all win? And they say, but I'm here and I've won. I'm not so prepared to do that. So the question then that we have is, how do we allow the victors of this system to see a higher self in a reform of the current systems that is more just and more inclusive? And that's really, I think, the big challenge that we have at sort of the moral and ethical level. And then what that looks like in detail, I think we can get into as the conversation goes on. Thank you for the opportunity to join, and I look forward to learning with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely, you made also very important points about what multilateralism should stand for today and what we want from future multilateralism, basically. I would like to now give the floor to Wanto to give a few words as well. So Wanto, please.
All right, thank you so much. I just want to be grateful to Rory for the privilege of being on such an interesting panel. Basically, one of the cardinal issues that we should be able to analyze is have multilateralism been a big favor to resolve in our world? The answer is basically in twofold, yes and no. First of all, multilateralism have reduced a leverage in terms of national countries' protectionism policy. In a bigger form, the US is a greater example of that. Country adopt some sort of linkage in terms of the United Nations General Assembly article sovereignty perspective, where countries have their rights to independent decision-making process and governance. And as such, each political process sort of define their own contribution to multilateral contribution. Beyond just that, I think our world is still far away from achieving some sort of authentic multilateral existence in global issues. I think sometime around 2015, we saw one of the biggest ever multilateral cooperation in the World Humanitarian Summit. It started first with a gathering of young people from all across the continent in Qatar, which brought the Global Youth Consultation, and then brought the United Nations Agenda for Transformation, which have 3,000 plus commitment in the first stance. And I think it's important that we can be able to checkmate those kind of existence. Yeah, thank you, Dan. Those kind of commitment that we see around the world, and it's important that we can be able to look at how we can be able to transition multilateral cooperation in countries' policies, in cooperation in resolving some of the crises in our world. For instance, climate change is another cardinal aspect. You still have cooperation who haven't agreed to the Kosovo Agreement. The Kosovo Agreement provides a direct space of reducing industrialization so that we can have a direct mandate on improving climate change. Beyond just that, the Paris Peace Agreement have seen countries failing its mandate. Around the world, we still have conflict that have not been resolved. in Syria, in Afghanistan, and in diverse places. We have seen multilateralism also being used as a forceful means of impeding national government. The case of Libya is another stance. And at the end of the day, we see bigger countries get away with adapting it, unfulfilling their role in multilateral cooperation. The current COVID-19 crisis, you found that the US withdrew its support to the World Health Organization. And I think if we can be able to create some sort of accountability process in multilateral agreement, we can be able to ensure that all of the world can be able to stand together against rigid policies that sort of define countries' disagreement with multilateral purpose. Will be the best means. In recent time, also, there have been some sort of great progress. For instance, the European Union augmented its council to forge cooperation that embraces effective multilateral to advance national and global functions. In this agreement, the Council adopted 3 basic functions which are very important. Maybe it might shape the discourse. It's created a space for upholding international norms and agreement, extending multilateralism into global realities, and reform making multilateral organization fit to a purpose. On December 12, 2018, the UN adopted something we call IAPSS 127, which basically served as a means to be able to include the UN solidarity and peaceful coexistence, tolerance through diplomacy after the 1945 Second World War. Today, we have a day of multilateralism, which we celebrate and embrace. The shared commitment we have against some of the global crises we have around the world. I'll be greatly happy to be able to share more about some of those policies that are now working, some of those means, and how we can be able to include the global youth constituents to embrace that shared commitment. That shared commitment and solidarity we can be able to find within the power of working together, the power of resolving global crises together, and the power of embracing international norms that stand for collective working so that we can have a better world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also, thank you for making a great point about basically the bigger challenges that the world is facing right now and how we can see the future of multilateralism addressing them, especially in the UN. And I'd like to kick off this discussion with a question that kind of rounds out what all of you have been saying. So as we know that the UN is a major player when it comes to multilateralism, probably the biggest multilateral body in the world. And in relation to that, we see that the UN has somewhat failed to address the multilateral crisis that exists between the United States and China. So my question to you all panelists, how do you see the UN's role in the future in addressing the crisis of multilateralism that the world is facing? And maybe a question to Rustam and Mr. Dworkin as well, as they have their expertise focused on the European Union. How do you see the EU itself mitigate in this crisis, especially since it holds a powerful position on the world stage as well? Mr. Dworkin, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. So that's a very good question. And, you know, the United Nations obviously is, as you say, it's the kind of foremost multilateral organization in the world. It's kind of the, you know, the core of the multilateral system. And yet, in various ways, the UN kind of can't help but reflect the, you know, the world around it, and particularly the power relations around it. And that's particularly true, I think, when you look at the UN Security Council. So as one of the other panelists said, you know, the Security Council is explicitly organized on the basis that the most powerful countries in the world at the time that the UN was set up should be the ones that are represented there as permanent members. So it is a kind of, you know, in some ways reflecting a power balance from a different time. And yet it's quite difficult to reform because the current members don't want to give up their powerful positions. But beyond that, I think we can see the way, if you look at the, you know, for instance, Syria, the conflict in Syria has been one of the biggest challenges on the agenda of the UN Security Council. And it's been effectively paralyzed because this is a conflict in which the interests of one of the permanent members, in that case, Russia, are directly involved. And so the UN Security Council really functions when there's a kind of mutual shared interest among the members in solving a crisis. But when the members themselves find themselves on opposing sides within a crisis, then the Security Council is blocked. And we've seen, a kind of gradual increase in recent years in the number of issues where the Security Council members are kind of finding themselves opposed to each other. So it still, does some valuable work in terms of peacekeeping missions and so on. It provides a forum for debate, but it's becoming less effective precisely because a more competitive great power climate is having that effect. And I think if you look throughout the rest of the UN system, you see a sort of similar things. The World Health Organization, for instance, obviously part of the broader UN system, is, as we said, there's this sense that it's not strong enough, not powerful enough to override the interests of member states. And yet the way it is a reflection of the way that the member states have set it up. So they've explicitly not given the World Health Organization more powers to sort of hold states to account for their health preparedness, because the states are uncomfortable with an international organization that's too powerful. So, you have this kind of ongoing trade-off. How far do states really want to cooperate and work together? And how far are they willing to empower international institutions to do that? Or how far do they tend to approach international institutions and international cooperation in this, it could be called zero-sum approach, where what they're aiming to do is increase their power or their sway, as opposed to adopting a collaborative approach. And as we get to a situation where mutual interests seem fewer and kind of competition seems greater, that puts a strain on the UN system. So just quickly to talk a little bit about Europe, the European view is to try and position itself as a supporter of multilateralism and to some degree as a kind of neutral player. I mean, obviously, Europe is not going to be kind of neutral between the United States on one hand and China. It's much closer to the United States. But on the whole, the approach that the Europeans are taking is to try and reform the system. They're looking for a kind of common ground. They're looking to bring people together. They're advancing proposals to reform different aspects, whether it's the World Trade Organization or the World Health Organization, to improve the kind of peacekeeping operations. On the whole, the European agenda is one of reform and improvement. And that's a kind of noble cause. But the question is whether that sufficiently takes account of the kind of, global political climate. Because in the end, the problems, I think, are not to do with the specific design of the institutions. They're to do with the politics behind it. So I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Dworkin. Yeah, you made a great point about how the big power balance isn't really balanced right now, when we obviously mentioned the UN and the United States and China and Europe, obviously, as well. And we will obviously see in the future how and if that can be reformed. But if I may ask you, Rustam, from your perspective as a youth leader, how do you see young people engage in this discussion especially? And how do you see, for example, young Europeans engage with young Americans or young Chinese activists in terms of cooperating with each other, for example?
Thanks so much. I think what Anthony said was very interesting, and there were a few points which are very current. I think we have to establish kind of like a twofold system. On one hand, we have the more high-level diplomatic engagement between the US, Europe. I remember when the High Representative Joseph Perel, he spoke on the decisions that the US has taken. That was back in April, in terms like US withdrawing from the WHO, or like the information flow. It's something that I second, that Europe tries to kind of like put that global strategy, that like multilateral strategy forwards in by engaging like with the UN, by engaging with all the countries of all the member states. It's something that they share very commonly, or they have a very, I would say, kind of like almost a fixed arguments against like what's happening in Russia and Belarus and what's happening like the China position on Hong Kong. They have been very put forward in the way they try to kind of like go around. I would say the second, when I look at all the youths, there's a lot of happening, and there is not so much on how the European Union or its member states can support young people. It's almost happening like on the sidelines by young people itself. I'm friends with someone that runs the European Young Leadership, and it's an organization that was founded by in Europe to promote European youth engagements in the G20, G7, and a few other formats. I think a lot of European policy has happened on the sidelines of what's currently happening between the US and China challenges. And I think youth should try to voice more what their position is and how they can contribute. But it's the European Union and the European countries or the EU that needs to be able to give the seat to the people and kind of have a constructive dialogue and see how it's affecting young people. I think when you look at China, and it's a very difficult topic because it kind of touches on the trade relationship, it touches on the migration and the most recent fundings that have been flowing towards the COVID situation. I think it's really trying to have young people at the seat, because when you look at all the discussions that go around and all the conclusions that have been put forward by the Council of the European Union, there's almost like no mention of young people and how it affects young people. Maybe like just one sentence, maybe like 2 sentences, but there's almost no mention of young people. And I think from my point of view, and something I've been put forward to try bring young people into discussion, try to bring young people into that engagement with high-level political leaders, with high-level diplomacy. It's one end, but it's really that action that has to be taken and really put inside of those documents to make sure that it's written out and then it can be acted upon.
Thank you. Thank you, Rustam. You made a great point about how we should, or how and we can engage young people on this discussion as well, and especially on the issue of climate change, of which I'm going to ask my second question. I know Mr. Dworkin won't be able to stay with us for the entirety of the discussion, so I'll brand another question that all of you can engage with, and it's on the topic of climate change specifically, and how multilateralism is going to affect well, at least the world's path in terms of treating climate change. We know that the EU has set its goal for 2050 to be a zero carbon emission continent, if we can say that. However, with the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, and with China and Russia not really staying up to their promises in terms of their climate change goal, my question would be how do you think multilateralism can approach this issue, or how should states approach this issue specifically? And in relation to the EU, since it really has taken a step to be the global leader on this topic, how do you guys think the EU can approach this this point? If we can start with Mr. Dworkin.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, I will have to go in a few minutes, so I apologize for that. And I'm grateful to you for giving me my questions towards the beginning. Thanks for that. So as you say, climate change is, seen as kind of one of the big priority issues for Europe. And I think if we look at multilateralism and climate change, I guess there are 3 points that I would want to make. Number one, multilateralism is the kind of archetypal multilateral issue. Climate change is the archetypal multilateral issue because, obviously there's not a lot of point in one country or even one continent like Europe trying to take action on climate change if it's not shared internationally. In the short term, it's expensive and the benefits are shared for everyone. So really it makes sense for the world to address it together. Global health would be another example of a kind of similar issue that must be tackled collectively. And then I think if we look at the way that the multilateral system is currently addressing climate change, we see something which I think is a kind of emerging new model for multilateral action, which is perhaps better adapted in some ways to the kind of more competitive international world that we see. So perhaps the old model was to have sort of legally binding agreements with some sort of kind of accountability built in and a sort of institution set up to monitor it. But what we see with climate change is this process where countries are kind of setting targets. And then the idea is, it has this kind of element of the countries are responsible themselves for meeting the targets and they have to account for what they're doing. So in that sense, it's a more open process, relying really on the kind of power of mobilization and public pressure to get countries to meet their self-chosen targets. And so that's, a sort of sign, I think, of how multilateralism is in some respects evolving. And the other way is that this is, a process which explicitly brings in not just states, but non-governmental organizations, businesses. In that sense, it's much more open to new participants. And I think that also is a sign of how some forms of multilateralism are changing. So the third point I'd make quickly is the European view. Europe has been a strong supporter of the Paris process, obviously, including hosting the Paris conference that led to the agreement. But it's not kind of putting all its hope in that process. It's also looking at a different way that Europe has kind of global influence. And that's through trade and through standard setting. And so I think, there's a lot of interest now in Europe in the idea of having some sort of border adjustment, climate related, carbon tax, so that goods coming into Europe that are produced in a way that's more kind of carbon intensive than would be tolerated on the regulations within Europe will have to kind of pay an adjustment to make up for the fact that they're not so climate friendly. And so in that sense, we see Europe trying to use its power as a kind of, it's not a military superpower in the world, but it is kind of a trading superpower. And therefore it's trying to use the influence of its weight within global trade to try and set standards and kind of push those standards out. So, I think if we look at climate, obviously it's a huge challenge and, we should definitely be doing more than we are. But it kind of gives you a sense of the different ways that Europe is approaching the kind of multilateral arena at the present moment.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, Rustam, you had a point to share?
No, I think it all falls, what I want to add, within like the European Green Deal, which is a very ambitious, set of goals set by the European Commission, like in the priorities, like for the next 5 years, like 2019, 2024, to make like EU's economy much more sustainable by bringing all those parties together. And I think the only way to do that is by having those meaningful conversations and actions, and including all those like member states, to the point that Anthony raised.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also, if I may ask Dan about his opinion on this, especially when we look at the issue of climate change, because you made a great point about how when reforming multilateralism, we have to look at the smaller nations, smaller players that haven't really been engaged in the discussion. So in relation to the issue of climate change, Dan, how do you think big powers, for example, should address the issue?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I actually think it's quite relevant, in fact, to the China question as well. I think they maybe it doesn't seem like the natural fit, but I think the most important thing that the UN can help humanity do is find consensus around some of these big and important issues. And as we find that consensus, we're able to find ways of working together. I think the reality is that sort of the real politic of treating these bilateral crises directly, especially when it's between two veto-wielding powers, is actually quite a challenge. And so as we see the limits of that approach, we have to find new ways of building this trust in these relationships. And I think climate change is one of the key mechanisms to do so. What I would suggest on this particular front in terms of what's to be done is to actually look at where things are working. So if you look in the small island states and how they are taking steps to mitigate the effects of climate change, we often don't turn to them for solutions because there's so few people there, they're not well resourced, that's not where the knowledge lies. I think that kind of attitude has to be put behind us and recognize that they are actually the ones who have been living with both the effects of climate change and the reality of their shared destiny. And I think that sort of microcosm of the shared destiny of the world is something that we can all turn to and learn from. And as we start to see knowledge is not solely in the developed countries, whatever developed means, I think that term is quite limited, we will actually begin to see that it's probably more along the lines of various processes that lead to the results that we wish to see rather than specific policies. We say all the time that there is no silver bullet. There is no magic policy that will solve all these problems, but there are processes. And I think those processes, when inclusive, and I think this gets back to Rustam's point about youth, but in any kind of historically marginalized or excluded population, as they're included in these processes, we will be able to find some of the strategies that will be necessary to build upon. But all of this is predicated on a couple of preconditions that I think we as citizens of various countries need to be articulating to our local and national authorities, which is the reality that we believe that the world is one and we're all global citizens in this larger scheme. And of course, there's a diversity of governments, there's a diversity of approaches, and that's actually great. That's very helpful. It's not necessarily a competitive thing, it's more of a cooperative thing. What are lessons learned from this space that can be applied to that one? And as we tell our local and national authorities that this is the world that we envision, those kinds of attitudes can bubble up, in fact, to the global arena. And that is where we'll start to find some of the solutions to come. But as the victors, as I referenced earlier, are those who are primarily nationalistic, thinking about their country in the interest of solely their constituency. And this is the way that the UN is organized. But as those voices gain in power, it'll be very difficult, and in fact, increasingly difficult to address things like climate change, as you have, as Anthony mentioned earlier, the free rider problem. I mean, you have many countries who say that you caused this, so you fix it, and I think there is some validity to that. But actually, you caused it, so let's fix it. Maybe a better way to approach it in order to ensure that the next iteration, the next world we're creating, is one that is actually built on justice and equal voice, and not, again, turning to only select populations to solve the problems. That's just a couple of thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Just to give the floor to Mr. Dworkin again, as he has indicated that he has to leave, I would like to say thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, the floor is to you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I apologize for having to leave, but I'm glad that I was able to take part so far. Thank you for the really interesting questions, and to the other participants for their comments. And this is obviously a kind of crucial question for international politics, and I think it's particularly kind of great to see youth and students of today focusing on these issues, because I think it is the hope has to be that people kind of coming up and rising, to positions of greater influence are going to be bringing this kind of perspective. And, perhaps we're going through a phase at the moment where there's a sort of somewhat of a nationalist turn in various societies, and perhaps that's a reaction to what went before. But it would be great to think that this kind of international perspective that sees value in international cooperation is going to be represented in the next generation. So thanks again for having me, and good luck with your work. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good day. Goodbye.
Just to, hello?
Yeah, yeah, Wanto, I would like to extend the floor to you as well. If you have any comments to make about that in relation to climate change and multilateralism.
Sure. I mean, I listening keenly to most of the contributions. First of all, I just want to share that we first need to acknowledge the aspect of the actual individuals that are being proportionally affected by climate change are being far more left behind. We need to ensure that we maintain some sort of equity in the climate dialogue. At the UN General Assembly, which was last September, we led a draft on a Samoa pathway. You definitely will see that they are leading structures that are grassroots based. They are empowering local organizations that solely focus on climate change, and they are taking drastic measures to ensure that everyone practice some sort of safe industrialization emission process. And they are very small island, and I think the UN have highlighted them as a part of change in terms of leadership in the climate war. But realistically, one aspect of equity being with one aspect of lack of equity in the climate fight is the fact that Africa as a continent, despite being targeted as one of the most pervasive and impacted continent, have been far more left behind the entire climate process. And if you take around Africa, you have flooding. You saw the cyclone, which was a recent crisis across Mozambique and several other countries. And the cyclone basically had 800 plus deaths. We basically speaking about a loss of 400 million in terms of industries and economic loss. We also had almost 2 million people were being affected and needed some sort of assistance, and 329,000 people were displaced in terms of agricultural production. And I think beyond that, you have also had an impact on water supply quality. You have also had, there's a mountain in Africa called Mount Kilimanjaro. There have been complete glaciers. And beyond that, these things are very impactful, but we still found a whole continent being left out of the UN agenda. And I think it's important we be able to engage communities and continents that are far more left behind the fight for climate change to create a holistic approach. But that's about it. We have to first realize that multilateralism can only work with some sort of accountability process. I believe wholly and solely that everyone should be treated within the power of multilateralism, free, fair, and transparent. In terms of decision-making process, in terms of failure to be able to reach on specific agreement. For instance, let's take the UNFCCC agreement, a complete failure. After 25 years of the UNFCCC commitment at the General Assembly last year, there was a realization that global countries have completely abandoned their aspect of maintaining zero emission. The European Union have been a great fight in terms of achieving that. At the General Assembly, we saw countries like Singapore that provide a very comprehensive plan in terms of having zero emission reduction in terms of industrial, and also they also had a plan that was built to provide better space maintaining global climate conservation aspect. And I think these kind of actions are very important to be able to ensure that countries like the United States, countries like China and Russia are being held accountable. But the UN basically work in terms of shared commitment and multilateral interests. And I think one of the biggest failures is the fact that the UN Charter provides independence in political decision-making process and maintenance of sovereignty. And if you have these two things that are embedded in the Charter, you definitely cannot provide forceful measure on ensuring that we have a maintenance of some sort of commitment in the multilateral process of cooperation. But realistically, we can be able to achieve it only if we have countries that provide more aids, more challenges to our work in the fight for climate change. And another aspect is at the General Assembly, we drafted a declaration which we call the Global Youth Declaration Climate Actions. An aspect of the declaration solely focus on youth and public mobilization. It's important that young people are engaged in this conversation. At the UN, there was a whole session set up for young climate activists, and I think that was a great aspect of ensuring that we can have the younger generation have some sort of intergenerational change and knowledge sharing, where they can be able to engage in climate dialogue, they can be able to infuse policy, they can be able to argue and advocate and create solutions, because this fight is a generational fight, and in time to come, definitely, we will be the major key player in the impact that will be full bearing. Also, one aspect we spoke about in the declaration is we spoke about support to initiatives that can amplify youth voices in their respective communities. This will be very important in cultivating leadership aspect. Another aspect is to be able to ensure that we strongly support and strengthen existing institutions. The UNFCCC, like I said, it's important that we strengthen the UNFCCC. It's important we strengthen local climate solutions that are driven toward creating a better opportunity for us. And we will be basically be able to share more on this, but I think with the trend we are currently engaging in, the fight against COVID-19 have shown that multilateralism does not really bear responsibility on certain countries. And it's important that to achieve some sort of multilateral cooperation in actions that impede our world, global countries like the United States, global countries like Russia and China need to show far more greater responsibility and leadership. And if we can be able to see that demonstration of leadership and responsibility that we are seeing now from the European Union, we can say definitely we'll have a better world that can be able to have a holistic agenda.
Thank you so much. You made a great point about the importance of including everyone in the discussion, and basically how the UN and especially through engaging young people, how we can address the climate issue. But if I may lead into another topic, which basically, if we are to look at why we haven't really made a lot of progress in terms of climate change and combating it, a lot of people would refer to the rise of populism and the populist movement throughout the world, whether it's North America, whether it's Europe, and now it's even expanding to Asia and Africa. So in your opinion, and you're free to share your thoughts on this, how do you see the UN and the multilateral movement in general address the issue and crisis of the rise of populism, which is against multilateralism by default, if one could say, and how young people can help tackle that issue as well? You're free to take the floor if you want to. Maybe Rustam, if you'd like to start.
Yes, thank you. I think it's so I don't have enough knowledge like an exact position of the UN towards the populist and each of the countries. What I do know is that it kind of like falls into countries like Russia, like China, US, which, nationalism and populism have, come to more and more into debates. I think when you have the Human Rights Office for the the High Commissioner, I think it really you need to address and you need to see what effect it has on the general population as well, including the youths, and making it inclusive as much as possible. Because when you try to put forward such policies or have a standpoint, I think it's very difficult because you don't want to neglect everyone else within the country, or you don't want to generalize it. And I don't have enough knowledge in terms of the position of the UN or the position of the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner on the populists, and especially on the more on the extremist side. But what I do know is that previously, when Michelle Bachelet from the UN Human Rights Chief, she said we should try to kind of not to oppose, but to make sure that we somehow embrace it in a way that we can work towards a more sustainable and more livable society.
Yeah, Rustam, if I may follow up with this, since you are a youth leader in Belgium, and if we were to say in Europe in general, with your discussion with young Belgians and young Europeans, for example, seeing the growth of center-right and far-right parties in Belgium, say like the N-VA or Vlaams Belang, or the rise of parties, populist parties in Europe in general, how do you see young people engaging with this topic and this discussion in general, if you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, so it is right. I think Belgium is a very unique country in a way, because we have three official languages. We have the Flemish or Dutch, we have French, the Wallonian, and then we have a part of the German part. We have so many parties that all have almost equally rights, and then you have the Green parties, and then you have like from on each side you have the N-VA, and then you have there's another Belgian party which is very strongly opposed towards migrants, for example, or people coming in. It's really like right now we're also at a point where the government in Belgium is trying to form a coalition, and there's like historically the linguistic divide has been an obstacle, a barrier, and right now it's kind of been put on the side, whereas you see some of the parties trying to include as many people as possible. They try to go for that electoral like volatility, and also to prevent what happened like back in like almost 10 years ago, when Belgium almost had no like formal political government. Belgium was still able to, I would say, work and be able to follow up on all the discussions, all the working, because each of the governments, so like the Flemish government, the French, like the Wallonian government, the German had their own ways. It's something that comes from, I would say, that divides, and a lot has been changed, I would say, but it's something that's been seen much stronger, and that has reflected in the ballots with the recent kind of like votings and the number of seats that each of the parties is representing in the federal government. You have the N-VA, which is on the one side, you have the Vlaams bloc, and I'm not able to speak on behalf of those parties. I've taken more I would say foreign approach, like in terms of youth representation. But a lot of those parties try to take the current situation into their advantage to gain that electoral success. Yes.
Yeah. And my bad. And Dan,
yes.
if you'd like to add on that, as you mentioned, for example, as I mentioned with the rise of populism, for example, we see a lot of the disadvantages go towards the smaller nations, and like you mentioned with the issue of climate change and stuff, so a lot of the smaller nations are left out. So how do you think, for example, what international organizations, for example, such as the UN, should do to be more inclusive for those nations as well?
True. I think it all falls into us being able to contribute to sustainable. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I find my headphones were out. So as an example, like last year I was at the UN Youth Climate Summit, which took place in September. And there were about 600 people that were fighting for climate action and trying to work with the UN and be there as a representation of each of the countries. I think one side, all the member states of the EU, they should have a very common framework on how to position themselves towards the climate crisis, and as well like the health crisis currently, because what we've seen, and like that's my experience and opinion from me being there at the UN Youth Climate Summit or a few other international forums, where not like there are only a few countries from the EU that have a very strong agenda. I know, like I can recall, like Ireland has a very good agenda. Netherlands, who has always their UN youth delegates present at formal events or engagements. I think that's something has to be more like formally agreed upon all the member states, so that every time something happens like that, they all should be able to say, okay, each of the countries will send one youth delegate, or one, like someone that is able to represent the voice of young people. In Belgium, it can be 2 or 3 people, depending on the divide of the country. And then it's more the support from the UN that should go towards the European Union. So, okay, we're welcoming you. And that's something that we've seen kind of like been starting up, but has shifted during the COVID crisis. I know there will be, I think next end of this month, there will be an African Europe youth panel, like a youth forum. Well, the European Union will put 50 young people with 50 young people from Africa to foster dialogue. There was something that was put forward as European Energy Days, where Frans Timmermans from Europe was listening towards young people and trying to kind of like consolidate all those ideas. So there's a lot of happening. I think this crisis has also allowed us as young people to participate in a lot of those engagements virtually, whereas before you really had to go, and almost like be at the door of a like an MEP, like a member of the European Parliament, or someone that is speaking on behalf of that topic. Right now, it's become much easier for us to engage with a lot of the stakeholders. But what I'm missing, and that's from my experience, and the reason why I've set up some of the policies and the foundation to work towards climate action and climate and health issues in Europe and Asia and globally, is really to try to build a platform which would allow young people to bring and help them engage with those policy making, because a lot of them are not exposed. A lot of them, they're aware of what's out there, but not in a very constructive way. There's a lot of momentum, there is a lot of discussion, ideas, but what I've seen, and that's something I follow, the European Youth Forum, for example, they've set a proposal after the European Green Deal was launched to actually start this kind of like dialogue between the EU and youth in a more constructive, in a more structured way, where we can, have like a set of dialogues, set of ideas, but then we can also help implement those ideas within the European policy and the framework, and have follow-ups, like what are the OKRs, what are the KPIs of those discussions. And that's what has been missing a lot on the UN scene, or any other international organization that is trying to set up like the Paris Forum, or the COP, which has been pushed back to next year. There's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of kind of like, I would say, hype sometimes, about the topic and importance, but there's no constructive dialogue, there's no meaningful dialogue with a constructive follow-up and say, okay, this is what we've done, this is what we've shared, those are the policies that were implemented, let's sit together like a year after and see how can we learn from it, whether it was a failed action or it was successful action, so we can build forward on it.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. Dan, would you like to add to that and continue on the discussion?
Yeah, I think I want to again take maybe a step back and think about the rise of nationalism within maybe a broader context of the challenges of any relationship. I mean, we've all been in relationships that have been tense and difficult, and you kind of have an option with any relationship you're in. You can either work to try and get through it by discussing how people are seeing the world, how they're understanding what took place, the conflict that maybe happened, or you can just get out and you can sort of eliminate that. Exile that person from your life, that party from your politics, or what have you. But the reality is that now we have a shared homeland, and that's very clear. And so that option of exclusion no longer is really on the table. And if you take that off the table and say, okay, we actually have to discuss the legitimate and perhaps illegitimate concerns that all people have in order to figure out what the reality is and what people are seeing. If you take off the table the idea that you can exclude any population, be that the racist or the victim of racism, now the whole equation changes. And I think this is the advantage of a deliberative body, a global deliberative body like the UN, where if it were working functionally and if everything were perfect, then people could actually come together and learn from each other and understand, okay, why do you think that your heritage is being attacked? Why do you think that life was better 30 years ago? What are those things that you want? Because maybe there is some truth from which like kind of this hostility is being born. And if we can see where that truth is, then maybe we can work to overcome it and get past it. And I think I was at this great global citizenship education event a couple of years ago, and the keynote speaker was talking about it. To change everything, we need everyone. A tagline that I could really get behind. But then that individual went on to villainize certain editors and publishers as like producers of hate and say, we don't need them. And I thought, well, you sort of undermined your very argument by saying to solve everything, we need everyone except for you guys. And now that taken at that sort of removed level, that is the same thing that's happening on the other side. We're saying to solve everything, we need this population, we don't need that population. And so I think this idea of really working through the difficult challenges is not nearly as sexy as getting in the streets and protesting and having the hunger strikes and all of this, which I think is important. It is a part of the conversation and it should be done in certain circumstances. But also if you're going to do that, then you have to be careful that you're not alienating the very people with whom we cohabitate a planet and with whom our future depends. And so then we have to start thinking, okay, what are the deeper levels of problem solving? What are our communication problems? What is our media saying? What are we allowing to be on the air and to be shared with everybody? Are these ideas really useful to the advancement of humanity? And I think the UN can play kind of a refereeing role in this. And it actually does do a good job at it. If you look at some of the independent agencies like the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as was mentioned by Rustam, they actually do a lot of good work monitoring these things. But of course, it's, many try to bury it under a lot of other ongoing forces because it may not be in the interest of those other forces. So I think it's on us to find ways to work collaboratively, to stay energized, and to really actually raise up much of the good work that is already being done, and not to just say, as they say in American English, throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is to say, throw everything away because some things aren't working. And so we have to find those things that are working and really encourage them and move forward with them. And then those things that aren't, figure out what are the deeper layers of these problems, because the superficial changes that I think we've seen over the course of decades are in fact not sustainable on their own terms. And we have to really come to terms with that and respond to it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Wanto, do you have any points that you'd like to add to what Rustam and Dan had to say?
Yeah, sure. I think basically, if you talk about populism, it's important to also include terms of nationalism, like he said, and also some sort of term on liberalism and conservatism. And you can also not ignore the fact that socialism, these kind of specific concrete policies and ideological political manifesto sort of define the identity of multilateralism. And this has been the greatest fight against climate change, the greatest fight against COVID-19, and the greatest fight against global conflicts around the world. There were specific questions on some of the failure of the Security Council. If you think about the war in Syria, if you think about Afghanistan, you think about Libya, one of the basic failures is that every country have their own political ideology, and because of their movement and the belief that they have in our global governance, they sort of defend the right to be able to intervene and the right to be able to engage within some sort of cooperation that bind countries together. And I think this can be resolved only creating some sort of accountability process, some sort of realization of the charter, the current charter of the UN, how it can be able to be transformed to better spaces that can be able to include some sort of transparency in the entire political process in decision making. Beyond just that, I think we all have a role model to play. We all are very, very important to be able to ensure that we can, from a grassroots level, hold our country accountable. And this has been one of the biggest fights in climate change, where young people all across the world are creating petitions. They are agitating, marching against some of the bogus agreement that their country have. And as a citizen, if you play that roadmap, it becomes an essential path to be able to influence policy directly from your country. And this has been what we highlighted in the Youth Climate Declaration called the grassroots mobilization process of empowering the younger generation to ensure that they can be able to take direct action and mandate. Beyond just that, I think it's important to realize that the kind of interdependence process in the UN proceedings. The UN maintained a very huge level of interdependence, a very huge level of maintenance of sovereignty and independence in political decision-making process. And as a result of that, you will realize that countries around the world are not binding on agreement. They agree only when it has a shared commitment and mutual interest. And this is one of the political process in almost all of the agreement, including the UNFCCC, that have been complete failure. Most countries who are at a bigger level of the aim of multilateralism decision-making process do not really fulfill their obligation. And as a result of that, they still have some sort of a holding agreement in the global powers, and they cannot be held accountable for some of the decisions they make. For instance, if the World Health Organization, programming the World Health Organization was done by an African country, you have seen the kind of forceful measure that the UN will have used in ensuring that this was wrong, and some sort of sanctions that will have been placed. Beyond just the World Health Organization, you have a political diversion theory in the World Trade Organization. There have been diverse political differences and countries' interests within the current World Trade Organization between Europe and the United States. And I think these are things that sort of define the level of economic opportunities for countries across the world, where they can be able to have some sort of spaces to integrate in trade, in business, entrepreneurship, and booming the economy in terms of the right trajectory, and some sort of global agreement that agree with the kind of principles that hold humanity in unity and togetherness. But I don't know if this might sound crazy, but realistically, I think beyond just having some sort of upholding of multilateralism, if we cannot be able to ensure that we transition the agenda of populism and the agenda of conservatism and liberalism, and also agenda of nationalism, if we can be able to ensure that we have some mindset of globalization where we can progress to the mentality that we are all one humanity, until we have that manifesto in our mind, it's very challenging to be able to achieve the kind of commitment we want. And if we can, we still will have difficulties in the political process. And I think the UN, for instance, is just a body of middlemen in the entire political process that have fewer leverages, have fewer audacity to be able to ensure the right things is being done because of the kind of interdependence politics. And once we cannot be able to assure, it's difficult.
Thank you so much. That's definitely an important point in relation to the discussion that we had, and basically it also complements what Rustam and Dan have been saying all along. Yeah, so to continue with the discussion, we have a very exciting presentation coming up in a couple of minutes. So I'll give the floor to you guys, Dan, Rustam, and Wanto. If you have any closing statements that you'd like to make, we can start with Dan, if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. I want to just express gratitude, of course, for the opportunity to be here with you. And I think, you know, one thing that I hope we can take away from this conversation and others is kind of an analysis of our expectations of multilateralism. I think we sometimes put so much stock in it that we forget this principle of subsidiarity, that, you know, decisions taken at the local level actually have tremendous impact. And we're seeing that with COVID. You know, the number of superintendents of schools that have taken center stage as a result of this crisis is really quite remarkable. And you know, many of those people who are perhaps nationalists and fearful of a too strong international executive are actually right in some sense. We've seen very dangerous things with the over-centralization of power. And so then the question that we should always be asking is the multilateral institution the best one to address this? Or can it be addressed better at the local or national level? Always knowing that there need to be these international sort of backstops that can support and allow when there are problems at the local and national level. But I think we just have to be very critical of the centralization of power and the sort of reduction of the narrative around the impact of local action and of individuals to make a difference, as many of you are doing. But I think that this hierarchy that we have, that the global is more important than the local, or that the regional is more important than the national, we have to really challenge that so that we can find the right lines of action at the right levels of governance. And of course, again, always with these strong international frameworks that do already exist and that we need to continue to advance. So again, thanks for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure as always to learn from and with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll just give the floor and pass the floor to Rustam right now. Rustam?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for giving the platform and the opportunity to express our views, as well as the views of the youth. I think it's great to hear from our fellow panel speakers, from Dan and 1-2, as well Anthony, and just to see the interest. I think, like Mike, only conclusion would be, and that's something that follows from what Antonio Guterres said in his remarks, you know, like under the theme of multilateralism after the COVID-19, and you know, what kind of UN do we need following this like 75th anniversary. I think one point he expressed is we need a stronger multilateralism, multilateral cooperation. I think we're looking at a lot of countries working independently within their own crisis, and that's something that COVID has exposed towards like food, trade, health, climate. The pandemic has brought up a lot of, like, I would say, fragile systems that were never tested, you know, like looking at a health emergency or health deployments. And this all sparks, like, and you know, some countries may find a stronger populist movements arising, because when you look what's happening in Lesbos in Greece, you know, like the fire, and then like people protesting, and you know, a lot of like camps due to migration, and you know, sparkling that type of voice that it is a challenge, and it's, you know, increasingly become more and more I would say situational, like per country or like per locality. And I would second the opinion like of Dan, that sometimes like some local actions may yield better results than you know, that multilateral cooperation, because in often cases when I engage in, you know, on behalf of my foundation, and we find that we have a better representation and we have a better cooperation with the local people or the local community, rather than them having a better cooperation like with an international actor, because often they're not well trust, or you know, they're more like stringent because of the process, because of some of the type of like, you know, networked multilateralism, I would say, in some cases. So I think multilateralism has it should be like on the forefront, and in somehow maybe it should be like networked or like considered multilateralism, like where it can drive most social impact. It can drive sustainable development, you know, towards achieving the sustainable development goals. But we should not forget that, you know, sometimes regional actors, national actors know the country the best way, and they know how, you know, it's in their own interest to run it. And I think then you have EU, which is more facilitator, and, you know, kind of like makes the proposals. And I think that's something that maybe some countries can learn from, or, you know, take away. When the Council of the European Union comes together, they make those concept notes, they make those conclusions, which are never binding. So, you know, those are the ideas that are agreed by all the ministers, and then it's up to the communities, the local government, to take them into consideration or to implement them in the best way it would work towards the civil society. But we should never forget not to bring the civil society into the discussion. And I think that's one of the important points I want to raise as well from youth as well, just from general, to make those stronger institutional links.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for what you said, and also you made an absolutely great point about how we can engage more people on the topic, and we can actually get more people to be active on this issue as well. I guess the closing statement then will go to Wanto. Wanto, we have the floor.
I just want to be grateful to Rory and all of you guys for inviting me on this panel. This has been an interesting space of learning. And also, I'm grateful for your expedient moderating process. Beyond just anything, we have seen tremendous progress with multilateralism, but equally so, there have been also devastating failure. Countries that are deeply affected by crisis have been far more left behind. And I spoke about the climate crisis. Rigid decisions have been made in terms of great powers' interest on countries creating deplorable situations of humanitarian crisis all across the world. That cannot be notwithstanding with the Libya crisis, notwithstanding also several other countries like Syria and Afghanistan. And I think other countries still make decisions on the basis of shared commitment and interest. Multilateralism needs to be transparent. We need to be able to uphold stronger commitment for humanity. And beyond just that, the fight against climate change have been subsided to from a basic point of a single continent having an overgrown commitment to engage, and other continents seeing this as not an issue. There is some sort of divisiveness in the entire multilateral cooperation process, and we need to ensure that commitment should be more united, more inclusive, driven towards solidarity of one humanity, where we can have forge a sort of realignment situation of ensuring that we see this as a global crisis and not as unanimously proportional to a specific place. And that has to do with, for instance, the COVID-19 crisis as well. And I think the way in which the United Nations Charter is being set up, is difficult to have specific countries maintain some sort of interdependence process in their decision making. Some countries have far more greater power within the UN system. And I think when we can be able to ensure that countries that have been left behind can have some sort of transparency process, we have to be able to transform the current norms that provide greater power to specific countries, just in terms of their wealth, in terms of their economy and so forth. And I'll tell you something for real. The crisis of climate change cannot be resolved without commitment. Like you said, the European Union have had an agreement to create some sort of zero emission. Those are the kind of commitment we want from different countries around the world. And beyond just that, we need a holistic agenda for countries that are also being affected within the climate crisis, like Africa. I'll lay out some instance in which the cyclone affected billions of people across Africa. And also just now the cyclone, also you have the humanitarian challenge estimated by FOP is around $1 billion+ in terms of just a single crisis. You still have drought, you still have pestilences, you still have flood all across the African continent. And I think this can be a very rallying approach. Pandemic also, COVID-19 also shows that pandemic have always been a case of our world. You had the Ebola crisis. Global multilateralism should also be able to engage in specific crises that sort of deplore our world. We cannot have a realignment of disasters and conflict and pandemic. We had the Ebola crisis, and now we have the COVID-19. I think what's next, we don't know. We need to be able to ensure that we countries are held accountable for specific instances like pandemic that are not very known in spaces. Like for instance, also, we have to be able to ensure that we create better disaster risk mechanism process. We need to ensure that we have countries that still have a worse situation that cause our war can be provided aid and support. In a stance of drive for ideological concept of populist liberalism, nationalism and also conservatism. I think upholding a norm of globalization can be the best space of influencing what multilateral cooperation is. And I think globalization provides a space that every country can see crisis as their own, and they can be able to intervene regardless of the geographical barrier that that intervene within it. That means if a crisis is in Africa, the European Council can see that as an urgent mechanism, and also the United States can see that as an urgent mechanism. I think that spaces of reaffirming our belief for globalization can be our best means of ensuring that we have a better continent, better people, and a better space. And I think young people also are very crucial in this fight for ensuring accountability process in the UN system and also in our country. That means ensuring that your country have accountability within that decision-making process. We all have a role to play. We all have to be able to engage our country. We have to agitate on the solution. We have to ensure our voices are being heard in policy decision-making process. That reaffirm our country's commitment to multilateral agreements. And I think if we can be able to menace that perception and belief in our mind, we will have a better world. And we are definitely having there's a lot of optimism. We can definitely be rest assured that the climate crisis have shown that we have a huge optimism for the better world, for the better agenda that sort of reaffirm our commitment for some of those basic principles that safeguard us. Thank you. I really appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here as well, and thank you guys for helping educate me and educate a lot of people on the topic, sharing your perspectives, sharing your views. And I think it's very important to have these discussions with everyone, basically, so that we can hear the perspectives of different people from different regions with different backgrounds, because that's the way that we will be able to push and have a better world in the future. So thank you so much for that. And thank you also for being part of the discussion. So as part of the consultation that we're having, we have a very exciting presentation by that's going to take place in a bit. So it's a keynote presentation by Dr. Yoni Carli, which is scheduled to take for about 10 to 15 minutes. So if you'd like to stay for the presentation, you're more welcome to do so. If you need to go, obviously we all have obligations. So yeah, so Dr. Yoni, you have the floor, and you may share your screen for the presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. And I want to pick up on what was just said about different religions and different backgrounds, and how do we find that coherence? And that's what I'm going to present on today. Let me share my screen. I have screen sharing is disabled.
Yes, just 1 second. I'll try to get that sorted.
Okay. So what I want to talk about is the role, the impact of values and culture on multilateralism, and that we need to go a little deeper in how we approach it if we're going to really get to a more substantive results of multilateralism. I still have that I'm not able to share the screen.
Just 1 second, please, because we're having like a few technical problems. Just give me 1 second.
Okay. So the name of my talk is The Impact of Values and Culture on Multilateralism. And I want to start just really with a definition of multilateralism, which is when 3 or more parties are participating, especially governments or different countries are participating in a process. And it means multilateralism means having members or contributors from several different groups, especially different countries, working together. And multilateralism necessarily means multiculturalism. So I'm just sharing my screen now. Okay, can everyone see it? Yeah. Go into presentation mode. So multicultural means multilateral. And multilateralism implies that there's collaboration among different cultures, And also what's usually overlooked is that every multilateral table has its own culture. And the problems arise because that unique culture of multilateral groups themselves, the table itself, is rarely accounted for. On top of that, there's no coherent, and I'm going to emphasize that word because that's really what I'm talking about today, is bringing coherence of accountancy. And there's no way to account for the impact of the differences in worldviews that are at the table. And so a lot of multilateral processes lead to frustration. People feel blindsided by things that weren't in their culture, but they're facing it from another culture, but they have no way of compartmentalizing that or understanding it. Also, there's a lot of rhetoric for higher ideals, visionary aspirations that are not just rhetoric, but deeply discerned, but they're not grounded in inclusive data. And so they remain sort of over here, somewhere else, other than what we're trying to do. And there's no coherent platform for accounting for shared vision and for mutual interest, for finding out exactly where do we already agree, for ensuring that action steps track with the needs and the desires of constituents, because there's no coherent platform for understanding what constituents need and how that tracks with what's going on at the table. There's also very little means for tracking progress on multilateral agreements and positions that move beyond specific actions. And also there's so much incongruence with the charter, with the SDGs, with culture of peace, the Declaration of Human Rights, because we're not doing database tracking. And so that track remains kind of understood as fuzzy and something over there and other than what's going on at the table. Nothing could be further from the truth. Those things are seminal, but we have to find a way of bringing them into the processes. And so what happens is processes get derailed by very superficial focus on actions and agreements at superficial levels, and issues get superficially defined. And so then we find ourselves managing those same issues over and over and over again. Hard time getting there we go. So it works like this. Most things are happening at this level: strategy, goals, actions, those kinds of things. But we forget about what's really holding those up: values, culture, the intangibles. And that's really what I want to talk about today, is this metaphysical. Metaphysical is the study of causality. It's the science and the philosophy of what causes what. And so until we deal with these deeper things going on, we're never really going to be able, it's just going to be luck if any action really makes big changes in the long run. And when we ignore this is when you get accidents in voting, and wherever. You can't ignore, most of the iceberg is below the surface and can't be seen. And I would put the point forward today that most of the issues at any multilateral table are pretty much in the same place. The ones that are really clear and outlined in the agendas are on the top of the iceberg. So the result is that differences end up getting compounded and alignments end up getting overlooked, while nationalistic positions get locked in. And there's nowhere to go because all they've got is that kind of superficial ideas. And then that leaves multilateral actors stuck. They're stuck assuming a lot, which is really a hard position to be in when you're just working on assumptions. The assumption is that we all want the same thing. Of course we do. Everybody wants good stuff to happen, peace on earth. But there's a lot of assumptions that go in that. There's a lot of ways that different people express their values, and that's according to their needs. And what multilateral actors also end up conjecturing a lot about what their own stakeholders want, about what those on the other side are really about. And that conjecture is so dangerous. And there's not much else to fall back on, really, frankly, often. And they're also not able to factor in cultural differences in a meaningful way, because the deeper mechanisms of cooperation are overlooked and they're usually unaccounted for. And there's often authentic alignments that are already in place, that are there, but people are unaware of them. And so they don't build on the foundations that are truly there for them. And ideas like we the peoples from the UN Charter and other noble ideas end up remaining abstract. They can't be accounted for. And it's really unclear what that means to people, what fulfillment would look like. And so we get ideas about peace that look like this graphic on the right, which are important. They're all solidarity, nonviolence. All these words are really important, but there's no framework for accounting for them over time or for really recognizing how they fit into any given process. And so what I want to show you today is cultural transformation tools that measure values in order to quantify culture. And what they do is they establish a platform for multilateral coherence. So they give a specifics around identity, purpose, and vision, and we can lay them next to each other. We can see both sides of saying, this is your purpose of vision, this is ours, where do they connect and how? And I'll show you more about the particulars of that in a minute. It clarifies divergences in underlying needs and priorities. If you know that before you even come to the table, that really lets you hit the ground running. It's a great jumping off place. It also identifies coherence for enacting on the 2030 agenda, and it establishes that coherence across the UN, across member states, NGOs. It gives one coherent platform for understanding these things. And it provides an overarching inclusive framework for understanding and prioritizing everyone's needs and desires. And this gives a mechanism for recognizing nationalistic issues, but also transcending them at the same time. So you get the both and when you start working at the level of values and culture. And it also, by using a database platform, you get a baseline for tracking progress. And the tools that I'm ready to show you, the cultural transformation tools, have been used to transform cultures of over 7,000 organizations in 80 countries, and they've been used at the national level for 24 countries and for hundreds of government agencies. So this is what these do. They move from this kind of word salad and high aspirations to data-based accountancy. And I'll go into this particular case in a bit, but this was an Indigenous community in Australia that was really suffering with gang problems, drug problems, and some of the worst societal problems that we see all over. And these were some of the results they got by just quantifying what was going on. We look at what are people's personal values, what do they see happening in the current culture, and what do they all want? So here you start to get a shared vision that everyone's weighed into inclusively in the algorithms, in the data. They're already included. It's not about certain people coming up with a vision and then trying to, by hook, line, and sinker, bring people on. Either they have enough charisma or clout or bullying abilities to bring people on. You find out what is it that the people want, and then you work toward that. So measuring values to quantify culture is a means of effective means, because values connect the dots between visionary language and what's going on in the ground. Values connect the intangible with the tangible. And they are the expression of our ethics, which is where these higher level mandates come from, like the UN Charter, the Declaration of Human Rights. These are expressions of ethics. So values are the building blocks of culture. And when you have shared values, you have trust. Where there's shared values, you have a sense of community, because there is a sense of cohesion and you have that sense of unity. And cultural values are the framework within which every member of a culture operates. Culture is determined by the values, the beliefs, and the behaviors that underpin the policies, systems, and structures of any collective entity. See, when you start just trying to do the policies, systems, and structures up here, and you're ignoring all of this, you're just working on shaky ground. So culture determines what is and what is not socially accommodated. So if what's being built down here accommodates disparity, accommodates violence, then that's what's going to grow on the top. I think it's a little bit easier to think of it in terms of culture as a nutrient. Trying to get rid of this. And culture, culture as a nutrient. Like if you have culture in a lab dish, it grows some things and it doesn't grow other things. And so that's what we want to think of and quantify and account for is what are our cultures growing? And when you're at a multilateral table, what do both cultures sustain naturally by purview of just what they are? And until you measure and quantify what they are, that's just a guessing game. That's all conjecture. So the Declaration and Program of Action on a Culture of Peace, which I'm going to lean heavily on, is culture is a set of values, attitudes, tradition, modes of behavior, and ways of life. And they link mind and culture. They link the tangible with the intangible. UNESCO's motto is building peace in the minds of men and women, because that's where it has to happen first. And yet we never account for that. And values are those intangible mechanisms for making that link between what's in our minds and what's showing up. And they are also mechanisms for establishing alignment among multilateral stakeholders, and also for quantifying what are the non-alignments, where do we have the work to do, and where can we jump off from because we're already connected and agreeing. So values are supplied to people by their cultures, and they're accepted by people as their cultures. They unite groups and communities, they generate and support actions, and they transcend beliefs that divide. So in other words, if I'm really disagreeing with someone and I find out that they're really only saying what they're saying because they want to have time with their family, or they're not pushing me aside, but they're valuing their family, I can let go of my position a little bit and say, well, yeah, I can relate to that. My family's important too. So let's get on the page about that. Most importantly about values is they are primal human drivers. And according to twin studies, they are more important drivers in our behavior than even genetics. And they are drivers across all kinds of things. I put a copy of my book here because I have a huge references in the end that cite all of these studies. What we know is that when values develop, cultures transform. And values develop by way of maturation, education, dialogue, exposure to other countries and cultures, by tragedies, by leadership decisions. And when our values start to develop, we get new ideas, new traditions, new norms. And so by looking at the other values of the stakeholders at a multilateral table, we can start to transcend our own form of values to understand where they're coming from, what's going on. Minds and cultures transform in accordance with values development. So that automatically means that we've got to account for values and culture in multilateral processes as a means of accounting for deeper, more intangible elements of success. Accounting for values is accounting for culture. Accounting for shared and divergent values supports multilateralism by articulating foundational, deep, intangible drivers of results. They articulate at the level of causality. And until we get there, it's going to be hard to keep thinking that all of these wonderful projects that happen in the world are really going to take us to where we need to be. Accounting for culture supports multilateralism by factoring in the roles of those drivers. So here's how we do it. We basically, Richard Barrett many years ago took Maslow's hierarchy of needs and translated that into something that we could start to use to quantify these things, because values ultimately reflect needs. At the first level, you have survival. At the place of a company or a country, you want to make sure everybody's fed, that people are housed, that people are safe. And then you want to make sure that people are getting along, that things are happening in a social way, that best practices are happening, that we're looking at becoming better, that we're really tightening up and growing, and that we're making a difference in the world, and that ultimately we want that universal greatest good that's spelled out in all these documents. So here's just I'm not going to go through all this, but this is just a sense of how this is laid out. We can work with it at a personal, organizational, or community or society society, national level. And this is where the coherence comes in. We can take these measures at any place and work with them around each other and against and with each other. So I want to call your attention to these red words here. And these are what we call limiting values or potentially limiting values, and they lead to entropy or drained energy. So what we get, at level 3, where we have self-esteem, like best practices and efficiency and excellence, things like bureaucracy can show up, confusion, complacency. At level 2, you can get people manipulated, blamed, competition. At the national level, you get intolerance, hatred, discrimination, loneliness, and isolation. In the first level is where you get corruption and things like that. Corruption is the #1 corollary with violence in the world by peace studies. And so, if you don't manage that at the deeper levels, time has told us, history has told us, we have had phenomenal programs around nonviolence, and yet still violence plagues us because we're not managing it at the deeper levels. And when we do manage it at the deeper levels, we just kind of go, oh my God, that's too fluffy and too fuzzy. I can't really go there. But it's not fluffy or fuzzy at all, because we can quantify these things now. We just have to have the will to do that. So what we know is that social and economic performance is optimized by alignment between individual and cultural values. Contrary to cultural mythology, it does not happen by the triumph of one over the other. And that's part of what's going on at multilateral tables, is people are still buying into this idea that if I get over on you, I will win this process. And that's just a really faulty ground for multilateral success. And there's also old cultural mythology that has been proven just very recently that this idea of survival of the fittest is true, but it's only true if you include the capacity for cooperation as a measurement of fitness. Because once we get above very, very simple organisms, it's cooperation that says whether or not they're going to survive, not domination. And when you have non-alignment around values, that hampers fulfillment of whatever mission or agreements are there. We call that entropy. Entropy is the amount of energy that's consumed in doing unnecessary or unproductive work, in talking about what's wrong, that example Dan used of someone making a great statement and then talking about what's wrong with everybody else. So that's entropy. That's time not going toward adding value to what's going on and the needs at hand. And at the end of the day, entropy is a measure of the fear, the conflict, the friction, and the frustration that's preventing people from getting their needs met, and that causes systemic and that causes multilateral breakdown. So you can see, at this little graphic here that values and when you start to get these negative or limiting values, you start to get imbalance, you start to get just energy drain. Just think about in your own organization, if people are around the coffee pot, when we used to be around coffee pots together, and they're complaining about the organization, complaining about the boss, upset about how things, can't get the information. At the UN, we see a lot of silo mentality as an entropy point. And so when you're on an elevator with somebody, and because of rank and hierarchy and all those things, you can't pass on a piece of information or get a piece of information, that's entropy. So values can be developed and measured, and that would support multilateral work at a deep fundamental level. It would do it with inclusivity that is rarely there at multilateral tables. It does it with transparency. It provides the coherence, and we can do these cross-culturally by laying these tools on top of each other. So using values-driven database tools establishes coherence in transmitting and enacting all of these things across UN, member states, NGOs, private sector. It enables values fulfillment to drive policy making and practice, which is what the charter is asking us to do. We just haven't had a means, or we've had the means, we haven't deployed the means to do that. And it provides an inclusive basis for dialogue that enables multilateral actors to just hit the ground running, because we already know the landscape. So I just want to use this as an example here, because this is what I showed you before. when we deploy these, we looked at who are people, what do they really want, what's going on here? And these hollow dots are the entropy points. They're saying there's blame, there's confusion, there's caution, there's control, there's information hoarding, which we also have had come up at the UN, exploitation. These kinds of things going on are weakening the culture. They're hard to build on. What do they want? The group wisdom, and this is what I love about these tools, is you can mine the group wisdom. You're not guessing as a leader, you're actually representing what the group has said. And this is what they want. And we have a way of looking at values jumps. Actually, I can show you that quickly. Values jumps, we can track them. Here we can track like currently there's this is Asheville, this was a community one, but just to show you how we can track the difference. Currently they have 8 people say there's accountability going on. 159 people want more accountability. What a great place to start in building a community. They know what they want, they've already said. And there's the hit the ground running option that can really support a multilateral process. So we can also track how these things work with sustainability, with specific SDGs. So at the end of the day, this community of Indigenous people not only had all these changes as a result of taking the assessment and using it as a jumping off place for, you could say, even though it was within one community, the gangs were at the table, the healthcare people were at the table, the governance people were at the table. So it was a multilateral table in that sense. So again, these are kind of the 7 levels of where this all fits in, to just reorient you as we go into more. So the link between the SDGs and values is something that's newer in our work. Knowing that we value what we need, the SDGs are ultimately the expression of humanity's needs. And the UN definition of sustainable development is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future, basically. And so when we look at these 7 levels, we start to be able to discern how do we get to, how do we connect these intangibles with the more tangible targets and goals of the SDGs. And we have these laid out very specifically in the backdrop algorithms for these. We also did some work on delineating culture of peace values and connecting those with SDGs and with these 7 levels. So we can actually get a readout on how aligned is any specific culture with having a culture of peace, and universally and within. So the objectives can also be put out in the 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. It's another lens of looking at these things. Because we want to create conditions for every human being on Earth now and in the future to have the opportunity to experience health, happiness, and peace. That's kind of ultimately what we're all doing here, is we want to live in harmony, and we're trying to break that down in a way that we can really account for it. So if you look at it from the 5P perspective, we can look at the personal, private, and public sectors in terms of how they fall into the 5Ps. And these are graphics that we can put out that are specific to whichever parties that we're measuring. So we could do one for each of the parties at the multilateral table, as well as one for the culture of the multilateral table itself. And I want to tell you more about the national assessments, because when we dig into those, they'll show you a little bit more about how these things connect with each other. What they do is they provide a means for listening to constituencies and establishing coherence across constituencies. They highlight the most important national community issues, and they provide a roadmap, and they identify issues, and we can create demographics. So we see subgroups, we can see what do gender differences mean in these different countries, or at the different stakeholder organizations on a multilateral table. How are ethnicities different? And it enables people to participate. It's really participatory at the end of the day. So this is a list of up to date of all the countries that we've assessed. and the years that we've done the assessments. And I just want to go quickly through and give you a sense of what's been done. So this is a generic breakout, and it just shows you that here's what people think individually in this anonymous country. Here's what people are facing: unemployment, bureaucracy. Here's what they want. They want, this level 4 is transformation. They want to transform. They want things to change and get better. They see that, and you often see that in these. The people will tell you what needs to be done, and there's a lot for someone whose job it is to sit at a multilateral table to really know that and not to be guessing or conjecturing about it. So this is the UAE. It was measured in 2012. It gives you a sense of, strong culture in its own way, how it wants to develop. Just to tell you, entropy among nations is the dysfunction that occurs due to a felt presence of unmet needs or fear. And it really shows like potentially limiting. So here's Australia from 2016. You see a lot of potentially limiting values and where they want to go. You can see they want a lot of level 1 work. They want bottom line accountability, and if that's what you really want to see is a full spectrum. You want to see like a full, these dots kind of spread out between all the different parts. Here's Australia done over time. In 2010, here's where they were. In 2016, here's where they were. There hasn't been a lot of progress, as you can see. There hasn't been much change, but at least it's accounted for. Brazil over time from 2010 to 2017, also a lot of problems. They have a lot of violence. They have some issues with governance right now that really speak to violence and some of these issues that the population identified. South Africa also really riddled with its own issues of entropy. And these are just the top 10 values. So there are a lot of other positive values that I'm sure came through, but they're not there. They don't show up in the top 10. And people will tell you what they want: accountability, they want honesty, they want employment opportunities. These are the things they want their representatives to work toward. So France, they did over many years. This is from 2012 to 2014, 2015 to 2017. You can see not a lot of progress and in fact, some regression in what they're doing. Iceland, they were done right before the crash. And when Richard Barrett did it, he said, if I saw a country like this, I would think that they were gonna just crash completely. And when he got on the plane, they did. Saudi Arabia, Bhutan, which does all the happiness and well-being work and actually measures for these things through its own indices, which, by the way, this is not the only index out there to do this. There are other tools. This is just one that I wanted to go a little more deeply with today and open this distinction of accounting for these things. Singapore over time, Turkey, no progress. Here's the USA over time. Again, no progress, and look where we are. Singapore, and here's the percentage of entropy by nations. So I think this is really interesting. Where you see the most entropy is where you see the most struggle. So you quantifying and measuring values and culture, you can see exactly data-based what is the culture of each constituency at the table, the culture of the multilateral group itself, what the different demographics want, and how they're already aligned, how they differ, how those differences should be addressed, and what the differences are within and between multilateral interests. And that identifies common and divergent concerns for future development. And it provides a really detailed roadmap as well as common scaffolding. And it also outlines, you can see when you lay these together, how one culture can transfer values to another. I just want to show you this because this was the Democrat and Republican parties that we were shocked when the results came through on this. There was only one value difference. Imagine if the conversation started here in the US of how much alignment there is. And then, this is the jumping off point for trying to find connection. So we can lay these kinds of things, the different demographics together. These might be two genders. These might be two income strata. These might be two different countries. Depending on what we're measuring, and then we see what are the actual differences. You You can see group A, there's an awful lot of energy down here at these lower levels that probably wants to burst through, because that's part of the human spirit, the human condition, is it wants to expand, it wants to grow. And so usually there is this desire to uplift, and group B already has some intelligence and some work going toward that. And so there's some work that can be done. Group A is obviously really strong at this performance level, and so there's something they can contribute. Here's a different of the current culture. Here's how these two, there's a lot of graphs and charts that come out about these. So that was the current culture of those two groups. Here's a desired culture. This says, here's where we both want to go to get, and these are the differences of where we want to go, and these are the alignments around where we want to go. So when you use these platforms, you can track intangibles, and including perceptions, and you can track fulfillment of the UN's values and other visionary global mandates. You can identify very specific alignments, and that naturally supports negotiations when they get challenging. You have a strong bedrock to fall back on. These maps and graphs and charts also plot out the gaps and the blind spots and the leading edges around processes, and they show where entropy is depleting the process. And when you can name the entropy, it's really powerful. You can manage it much quicker. And it clarifies what people's actual priorities are. It tracks the cultural alignment of the member states and international agencies with local desires and needs over time, and in coherence with specific multilateral aspirations, culture of peace indicators, and SDG progress. It allows a coherent system for establishing common scaffolding, for identifying, supporting, and tracking shared interests across nations and other sectors. And with that, I will stop my screen sharing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yoni. You really presented a completely different perspective of what I personally perceive, for example, of what multilateralism is and how we can work on improving it. Definitely, I personally have never looked at it from this perspective, and it was really educational. So I really thank you for this wonderful presentation. So yeah, thank you. So now I believe we have another presentation, somewhat, which is basically from Margot Lazaro, which is in the form of an SDG IA push. So Margot, if you wish, if I may just structure this correctly.
Sure. Hi. So I've been here the whole call, and I think it's been another one of your amazing experiences. I just want to say really quickly, my name is Margot Lazaro. I'm president and chair of the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development New York. I'm also the co-founder and CSO for the SDG Impact Awards community, and we are co-sponsors of all of the series, and we're very proud to be so. Thank you for inviting us, Rory. You're amazing as always. And also, I'm also a coordinating partner for UN 2020. I just want to add, that was an amazing presentation, Joni. Can you please say, that's like a day long, please, seriously, you did it all so quick, but it's a day. We all need to experience that. Could you please send me a link? I'm just curious. I need to spend time with that. But thank you again. So with the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development, New York, we actually focus on really developing the key partnerships for the related to the Sustainable Development Goals with all stakeholders, including member states, working with UN agencies, working with CSOs, academia, and also the private sector. We think it's really important to bring everybody into the equation for the SDGs, which are the best roadmap that we have to go forward for the success of the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, to leave no one behind. I put my information with links to both the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development and the SDGIA Impact Awards community in the links over there. Anybody can, and also my email address if anybody would like have any questions or like to contact me for any support going forward. I'm happy to work, of course, with Rory. So a couple of years ago, a colleague of mine, we decided to develop the SDG Impact Awards as a way about bringing people together who have positive, impactful solutions to the SDGs from around the world. And so just to let you know, the pandemic happened, but people are sending in their amazing, impactful solutions from everywhere in the world. We have from the Middle East, we have from the Pacific Islands, and we just the United States, Europe, Africa, everybody's contributing. And we invite you all to contribute your concepts to the SDG Impact Awards and become a part of our community. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love listening to all of you. We look forward to being supporters again in the future. And great job moderating too. Good job on that. You did good. And thank you. I'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much as well. Thank you for sharing the information. I'm pretty sure most people here are extremely interested, and I obviously personally encourage everyone to contribute and participate if we really want to overall make a difference. Now we are supposed to move into Rory, as she will make a few remarks about the UN 2020 agenda and declaration. So Rory, if you're here, you have the floor.
I'm here. I've been here the whole time. Thank you so much, Bassem, for moderating this incredible discussion on multilateralism. It is very, very timely. It's funny because Dan had actually sent us a link about how students are facilitating these consultations for UN 75 and sort of creating a more inclusive space for student representation in the UN. And I think that this dialogue is definitely representative of that. Thank you so much to Joni and for all of our presenters. Joni, your presentation was incredible, and we really do appreciate that because it gave us a really strong foundation for what multilateralism is. I think that it's a very big word. It's a word that not a lot of people really understand. It has a lot of different connotations, and so we really do appreciate you giving us a key definition and a key way of thinking about these different issues as we move ahead. That being said, my name is Rory Munshine. I am the Director of Strategic Diplomacy and Civic Engagement at the International Association for Political Science Students. I am also the Communications Associate at UN 2020. So I come to these consultations wearing two different hats. We've been hosting these consultations in order to get a more inclusive, to build a more inclusive UN system that is more responsive to the people's needs. UN 75 is about building back better. And in order to build back better, we need to incorporate all different voices from all different walks of life to understand how these issues affect people and the intersectionality between these issues. Because by understanding different experiences and the variation in human experience, we can work together to actively address these problems and bring people to the table to create a more equitable society. To that end, we've been proud to facilitate over a dozen UN 75 consultations, particularly within the last few weeks or so, which has been incredible because we've got a lot of information from so many different regions because we have 6 different regional divisions. And we've been able to understand how these issues affect different regions and bring more people to the table. This is unfortunately our last consultation for our last formal consultation for UN 75, but we are in the works. We are in the process of continuing to develop programming to allow people to engage with the UN 75 process. In addition to these different programs that we have been running here, we also want to talk to you guys about the UN 75 People's Declaration, because that is another way to make UN 75 count. So the UN 75 People's Declaration is an attempt to develop more people-centered multilateralism. It's to put people at the center of these multilateral negotiations, because sometimes when we talk about these different broad terms, we forget about the people that are directly impacted by these different processes and negotiations. So to that end, UN 2020 is calling for more civil society representation, as well as greater transparency within the UN system in order to build back better. Now, I encourage you guys to definitely endorse our declaration, which I can attach in the link below, because we only have 7 days to get all of the endorsements that we need. So you can endorse as an individual, you can endorse as an organization, and I'm going to make sure that we provide more information to you guys in a follow-up email so you guys can learn more about UN 2020, as well as our other partners that have been incredibly supportive throughout this process, so that you guys can continue to facilitate these dialogues on your own and within your networks. To that end, Bassem has a video on what the declaration is, so that you guys can learn more and get more of a foundation for understanding some of the important dialogues that are ahead in the next few weeks. Bassem, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Rory. I will be sharing my screen in just a little bit, just to show you guys the video. So just stay with me just 1 second. And yeah, here we go.
We need the sound on.
Oh, the sound is on. I'm not sure if you can hear it or no. Yeah, 1 sec. And the sound is on, by the way.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Would you like me to share my screen and do it if it's not going?
Yeah, please.
If you can make me the host, I don't think I have the ability to share screen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Oh, host disabled.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, I'm the host now. Great power, great responsibility. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
The United Nations celebrates its 75th anniversary this year. We, the peoples, have united to call our leaders to use this moment to strengthen, innovate, and rejuvenate our global governance system. To this end, UN 2020 has undertaken a global, multi-sectoral, cross-regional dialogue to develop a coherent civil society vision for a strengthened UN system. The outcome of this dialogue is reflected in the UN 75 People's Declaration and Plan of Action. This video will walk you through some of its most important messages.
At a time when change is progressing at a pace and scale unparalleled in human history, we can and must lay the foundation for a better path for humanity.
As the negative impacts of outdated national and global institutions, norms and values become ever more problematic. Humanity must respond as one people, united in vision while diverse in approach.
The health crisis, climate crisis, entrenched indignities such as social, gender, and race inequality, and the absence of sufficient coordination to end even preventable challenges.
Demonstrate the need for leadership characterized not by short-term victories, but by long-term vision and urgent action.
A paradigm of us versus them no longer meets our needs. We, the people, recognize the reality of global interdependence.
At the heart of the solution to today's challenges lies a sincere commitment to collaboration, innovation, and action.
The time has come to launch a rigorous, non-partisan, transparent, and inclusive process to assess global governance gaps and to develop a coherent strategy to fill them. We are asking global leaders and governments to
establish a post-2020 international mechanism to follow up examination of the global challenges we have and identify options to make the UN more fit for purposes.
Dedicate a civil society focal point at the Under-Secretary General level in the UN Secretariat. This position would bring deeper partnerships with civil society into the UN's work.
Take urgent climate action. The transition to net zero carbon economies brings opportunities to reduce poverty, inequality, biodiversity loss, and injustice.
increase the funding of the United Nations. Shortage of funding undermines the effective actions of the UN.
We call for the creation of a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly whose delegates would be directly elected by the people they represent.
Realizing the vision of the world we would like to see at the centenary of the United Nations and beyond requires bold and fundamental transformation of the present global system.
Let future generations look back on 2020 as the year when a threatened humanity determined with one voice to shed harmful legacies and move towards a shared future of dignity and hope.
Let the United Nations, beginning with its 75th anniversary, join hands with civil society in shaping the vision and actions we so urgently need to create the world we so eagerly await.
Make UN 75 count. Make UN 75 count. Make UN 75 count. Make UN 75 count.
Thank you to everybody. Is this working still?
We can hear you.
Perfect. Yes, perfect. So that is a little bit more about some of UN 2020's work. Bassem will be posting the link to the declaration in the chat box below. Since all of you guys have attended this very important discussion on multilateralism, we very much hope that you guys will endorse this declaration, which is focused on multilateralism and people-centered multilateralism. In addition to this, I also want to welcome our president, Justin Patrick, who is here to speak more about some of IAPSS's work as it relates to multilateralism, as well as some of our future events that you guys can get involved with to keep making UN 75 count. Justin, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Rory, and thank you to Bassem and the IAPSS Europe team for organizing this this consultation here. So, as Rory mentioned, this is our last consultation of I guess the first round. We might be doing other collaborations with UN 75 in the future, but I'd also like to extend thanks to all the the partners, speakers, and various organizations who've kind of helped make these consultations a reality. And I guess to those of you here and watching on the various live streams, I'd just like to highlight that these events have been possible largely through the the existence of IAPSS as a democratic student government representing political science students around the world. And in this case, we not only organize events like this, but we also do advocacy initiatives at all levels of government, including the UN and the global level. And so if you're a political science student or in a related field, or if and if your school isn't currently involved with IAPSS, I encourage you to sign up either as an individual or with through your school to get your local political science student association to sign up to be a part of our global community, so we can help implement kind of the goals set out in this declaration, kind of the other ideas we've been talking about over the past 2 weeks or so. So well, thank you so much and for tuning in here, and have a great rest of your day.
Justin, do you want to talk about some of the upcoming programs that we do have coming up, like our press corps and other ways that people can make UN 75 count?
Yeah, so I guess we're working on developing an IAPSS press corps to highlight I guess opportunities for student journalists to get involved and kind of report on student politics at the global level, because right now a lot of student journalism only covers campus issues, and it's very important that students around the world connect, and to do that they need to be informed, right? So they should be writing the narrative themselves and kind of reaching out across borders, right? So we haven't really unveiled this yet, but we'll hopefully unveil it soon. And I encourage you to talk to your student newspapers to tell them about this, so we can, give them access to the global spaces, not just in terms of IAPSS's own politics and advocacy initiatives, but also to the other organizations, other student governments that we kind of work with around the world. So this is kind of a fairly new initiative to kind of get this sort of cross-border collaboration among student journalists going. So I really encourage you to reach out to your campuses and kind of get them involved from the grassroots level, so we can give them press passes and make sure that they have a journalistic voice on the global issues as well as their local ones.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin, for coming here today and sharing the IAPSS vision and what IAPSS is striving also to do in the future. Obviously, IAPSS Europe would and all of the other regional sections will be involved, and we hope to have more of these consultations in the future, because they were very educational and they were very rewarding, at least to me personally, and I can tell for the many others that were present here today. So just to end, thank you all for coming here today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for presenting. Thank you for talking, for asking questions. I hope that you enjoyed this consultation and you enjoyed your stay here. If you have any questions, please do, feel free to email us or email me personally at europe@iapss.org, and check out our website. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And thank you so much for coming here today. Rory, do you have anything else to say?
And as a token of our appreciation for you joining us today, we are going to extend you guys a promo code to get a discount on your IAPSS membership if you would like to continue to work with us on these very exciting events. I know that different regions have different events planned. I know that Asia has various regional conferences that they are hosting. I know that Latin America is going to be doing stuff with their UNAs. So please be sure to join us and get involved with us on so many different levels. You can join our research committees if you would like to continue these conversations. You can join our World Congress if you would like to present these things and get more practice with talking about these issues in a very safe space. We also have connections to the European Consortium of Political Research, and we sometimes send a delegation to the ECPR. So definitely check out our website, and we will attach a promo code in the chat down below, or follow up with you guys via email to send you guys your promo code so you can join us.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you so much to everyone for coming, and we will be ending the broadcast shortly. So again, thank you so much for contributing to the event and just for being here. And I hope that all of you have a great day. Thank you.